Hello? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. How are everybody? How's everybody doing? Good? Yeah? Maybe we can start in the next 2, 3 minutes and just. No, that's okay. I was given by marching order by Satoko to already start the day. Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga. Goede morgen. Ming lava to my colleagues in Myanmar. Buenos dias to our Spanish-speaking colleagues. What other language? Ohayo gozaimasu. Annyeonghaseyo. Is it correct? And what other language am I missing? French. Bonjour. Yeah. I'm Marianne Manahan. I'm a feminist activist researcher, and I've been working with the collective research team that's actually updated the global survey on remunicipalization. And I've been working in the last 16 years with various movements and civil society groups in the Philippines and globally around different campaigns and strategies, both to deprivatize public services, but also to reclaim land, as well as to push for what we call as the commons. And I was voluntold by Satoko, my sister, for the last decade to and or so to give you a recap for this year. So may I just request everybody to come into their seats. So what we will do today in terms of the recap, we had a very exciting, intense, informative, and long day yesterday. I think we all had an information overload. I don't know about you, but I really have an information overload yesterday, and I'm still digesting some of the things that were discussed. But before we do or review together what we did yesterday, I just would like to recognize that we've had 300 participants yesterday that were here. So that's a big number. Coming from 37 countries, from Europe, North America and Latin America, from Asia, and from Africa. Africa is a bit underrepresented, and we're missing Oceania. But I would say that this is fairly a global meeting around the future is public. So let's give each other a big hand for showing up and for being here, and especially for people who come all the way from far places. And we have representatives from trade unions, from the academe, from civil society, community activists, municipalities and cities, and progressive political parties. Do you know the people sitting beside you? If not, it's the time to know them. So we have an exercise that we do in the Philippines called "What's in Your Bag." Basically, what's in your bag? What's in your bag is the topic that resonated most with you yesterday. So I would like you to think about the day yesterday and look in your imaginary bag or physical bag about one topic that really resonated with you, and discuss that with your sitmate for a bit, 3 to 5 minutes. Is that okay? Just to share, just to have a participatory recap from yesterday. Clap once if you understood me. No, okay. I'm not getting a lot of credibility here. Clap one if you're into it. Clap twice if you're gonna do it. Clap 3 times. We're gonna do it together. Okay, just sit, talk to your neighbors. Discuss the topic that's in your bag. Okay. Is that enough time to share what you discussed what feels most important to you yesterday? Okay, everyone. Thank you for discussing with your neighbors on what happened yesterday. So, just to recap, yesterday we had a very interesting day about discussing what public ownership is. That's really the focus of day one. And more importantly, there's a lot of rethinking and discussion coming from ideas coming from the panelists and also the participants about what democratic public ownership means. And I think there's more or less a level of understanding that we want a different public, a new public that's anchored around participation, democracy, social cohesion, rather than an old public, right? And in the morning, we heard about how radical or new municipalist movements are actually paving the way mostly in Europe and to a certain extent in the US in terms of coming up with new paths, in terms of challenging and showing that privatization and the economic model that we have right now do not work. And there should be a better way of doing things, better ways of organizing our societies, our cities, and that we're really fed up with privatizing profits and benefits and but socializing risks and absorbing all of the negative impacts of privatization. How many of you resonated the new municipalism as something that is important from yesterday? Okay, great. And we also heard that cities, although there are sites of capital accumulation and expansion, but actually cities and municipalities across mostly Europe are also sites or spaces for new experimentation, for possibilities and for bold changes. And I think one of the underlying strategies yesterday that I was hoping to come up with, but it's sort of like maybe a taken for granted reality here in Europe, is the strategy to win elections and electoral politics. You have to have progressive people in power to be able to do that, and that's something I think that is run across the whole day yesterday, and we listened to strategies from Barcelona. Um, uh, in Vienna and in other places in Europe, in Amsterdam, for example, of different strategies to democratize energy, water, and housing for all, building strong local economies and workers' rights. What would a new public bank would look like, and the other important thing that came out from yesterday is the importance of translocal and transnational networks and to be able to forge together in this collective project of challenging the orthodox and dogma of capitalism. But also, there were a lot of critical questions and tricky issues that were raised yesterday. For instance, in my own context, I'm already thinking, why is radical municipalism not happening at a certain scale and phase in Asia or even in Africa and other places? Why is it really concentrated in most of European cities? Are there different strategies and tactics that are being used by social movements and civil society to effect changes and reclaim the public or to imagine a new public? And then there's the dynamics and tension between the local and central. I would not expound on that because we have a couple of people that I've asked to also share their reflections. And then there's the whole issue of redistribution, social justice, as well as basic access. I mean, we've heard really progressive cities, but also rich cities, do a lot of changes. But what of countries or cities that are poor and don't have the resources, in places where basic access to services is a primary goal? I mean, how do we capacitate local authorities in the states, for instance, to be able to do that? Then there's the challenge, threats and context of austerity, the rise of right-wing politics, increasing and deepening power of capital and corporations. We've heard David Harvey yesterday. The primary question for him is, how do we address the power of the mass in the hands of the few? And are rebel cities and fearless cities the way forward to challenge this critical mass? Um, and then there's the challenge of decentralization in the global south. It's just in many contexts in the global south, this we have entrenched and powerful elites in the local governments, and we couldn't even speak of progressive powers at the municipalities, because you have local big men running local government services. How do we bring the different democratic praxis together? I mean, we've heard of different examples. What would be the possibilities, the spaces and mechanisms to bring this together, to learn from each other, and what can we pick out from other people's context that would work at least in our own context? So talking about context, it was raised by my friend and colleague Chandan, who I just met the other day, that the observation that the panels are very Eurocentric and even to a certain extent very UK focused. So I've asked a couple of my colleagues from Northeast Asia, from South Korea, and also from Bolivia to talk about shortly about their reflection, looking at, listening from the conversations and discussions yesterday, what resonated with them, what they feel is really a gap, and what would they imagine to, the topics that they would like to be discussed more today. So I would like to call Wolsan from the Korean Public Transportation Union and a member of Public Services International. Let's give a big hand to Wolsan.
Uh, Hi, yes, my name is Wolsan Lim, and I'm from the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, which is affiliated to both PSI and the International Transport Workers Federation. And so I've learned some really good new terms from Marianne. The first one is, I think I was also voluntold to make this statement. But the other thing that yesterday she said, or 2 days ago she said, we shouldn't romanticize the public. And I thought that was a really important term, but I'm going to use it differently and say, I also think from the perspective of, at least from South Korea, and then maybe it's also a union perspective, we also shouldn't romanticize the municipal. And I think, so the discussion was really on new municipalism was really stimulating and new yesterday. And I think for two reasons. One is that from the perspective of Korean unions, we wouldn't, it's new to think about municipal governments as actors of social change rather than as targets that we would press. And then the other is because I think even though later today I will be talking about a struggle for remunicipalization that happened on a local level that our union was actually at the center of, for the most part, our fights in Korea for keeping public services in public hands or bringing them back into public hands have happened at the national level. And I think for countries where there's a history of recent history of military dictatorship, there's a very centralized government structure, and so there's not a lot of autonomy in local government. A lot of our public services are also offered through national public corporations that then act at the local level. And so for that reason, a lot of our struggles have been on the national level. And also because, and I think this was a really important thing that came up in the second panel yesterday, that could be pressed a little bit more. That, of course, we need the work on the municipal, but if you just, even if you have good cases of public ownership on the municipal level, if there isn't a national standard to govern that, then that leads to inequalities between regions. And so we've always felt like the fight for the national standard that governs different regions is important. Just to end two cases in Korea, one is so the capital, the businesses will say we should have regional local minimum wages, and we fight against that. The other is that we just had our firefighting service be centralized to the national government to get over those regional differences. So I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wolsan. Big hand to Wolsan. And second one, Marcela Oliveira from Red Vida. Let's give a big hand to Marcela.
I'll speak in Spanish. Okay, I'll try my bad English. So one thing that I understood or that I saw yesterday, it's how much it's possible, how change can happen through taking state power. And that's a good way to do that. And I think it's good for Europeans to push for rights and to make advances on some things that are very important to improve our lives. As soon as we don't think that that's all what we have to get, and I think it's also important to wish the same for others. So I feel like it's a very important thing to think when we are working on those changes. But I don't know how many of you stay for the event in the night, which was the Transformative Cities Award. And what I saw there made me see the other side of the coin. Because it's not about taking power or taking the state, but it's more about what the things that we can do as a community and how we can reclaim our rights and how we can reclaim spaces and struggles, but from the point of view of the community. So something that I want to put on the table today is the notion of the commons, not as an horizon to get or to arrive, but more as a path that we can all do and we can all walk. So that for us.
Thank you very much, Marcela. So beautiful. Marcela is from Cochabamba, Bolivia, and for many of the water justice activists here in the room, Cochabamba is such an iconic case because it was the tipping point for a lot of deprivatization struggles and fight back against water privatization that inspired many of the remunicipalization movements that we have right now. And she's part of Red Vida, which is the Latin American network of water justice activists that's also not only fighting against privatization but are also looking at alternatives, public-community partnerships in the Latin American region. And with that, I think that's a good segue to introduce day two. Today we'll be discussing more about social struggles around the privatization of public services and strategies for democratic local public ownerships. And we're going to learn from lessons from the worldwide remunicipalization movement. And to guide us in the first panel, I would like to call Ana Mendez de Andes from Madrid 129, who's a feminist activist militant scholar doing her PhD in the University of Sheffield. She's been involved in collective militant research for the last 10 years, and she's part of the municipalist movement in Madrid and a former advisor to the City Council of Madrid. Let's give a warm hand and welcome to Ana.
Thank you. Thanks. I don't know if I have.
You don't have. You don't need.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's a pleasure for me to be introducing the first panel this morning on the remunicipalization of services. So the official title is Remunicipalization Today, Achievements and Challenges. So I would like to call to the floor our 5 panelists today. Yeah, so I'm sorry this is going to be again a very Eurocentric or Western-centric white panel, I'm afraid, although we have a very good representative of women, at least. A couple of house rules. For the panelists, please speak slowly. This is not only for the translators who I would like to thank for the incredible work of translating all this sometimes very complex thinking to various languages, but I should apply this to me as well. Let's try to speak slow so that it can work, but also because a lot of the audience is not native English speakers, so for those of us coming from somewhere else in the world, it really helps. So yeah, thank you. And then we have to say, Benjamin Gustin was going to come to speak about the remunicipalization of water in Paris, but because of a strike on transport in France, which is a very important and relevant fight, he is not able to be here today, but that's all for a good reason. So you can read the report probably in the book. So how are we going to do this? Is I would like to start with the interventions from Jean-Willem and Mary to give an overview of what is the state, the situation, the state of the art of the remunicipalization processes in the world, but specifically in Europe. Jan Willem is the Secretary General of the EPSU, which is a federation of public service union with 8 million members, and they have been collaborating with the reports of the TNI, and they have recently, I believe, published a report on the efficiency in the public sector. And Mary is also a long-term activist and academic that have been working with and not for also unions in Ireland. And then she's going to be based on the Irish example and processes again to drag some kind of reflections about the overall function and working on the public services. So please, Jean-Willem, if you will mind to start. Thanks.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Lovely city here in Amsterdam. But I haven't worked for a long time in the Netherlands, so Amsterdam is a bit of a strange beast for me when I come here. I work for almost 25 years now in Brussels for the European Federation of Public Service Unions, as was introduced, and we are also part of PSI, Public Service International, and as you've heard yesterday, there are many trade union comrades here in the room. Especially my colleague Daria has been working with the unions to prepare for today. When I was listening yesterday to the various panels and the various discussions, it was with a feeling of some proudness that I recognized so many of the battles where we as PSI or EPSU have been involved in, but also many of our unions have been active in. And one of the first battles to defend water services for us when we started to engage in the discussions around water services and the privatization of water services was in Vilnius in 1993, when our local union there was questioning the privatization, which was happening in many countries, and water privatization was also pushed in Lithuania and especially in Vilnius. And actually that was one of the first victories we had as a union movement, but also social movement, because he connected with many local organizations to oppose the privatization to a large multinational company at a time called Lyonnaise des Eaux. Now it's called Suez, well known, I should say, for its bad reputation among water trade unions and in the water movement. And we won that fight. And that was one of the first lessons we learned, also as European unions, to work with others in this battle. And I think we have consistently done this over the many years since. And we have won many battles together. One of the biggest successes we've all achieved as part of the European Citizen Initiative Right to Water, which we started, but actually something we've done together, is a success you don't see, and that is that there is no liberalization at European level of water services. And I think I always warn people myself against this sort of thing. And then it happens to yourself. Very bad, of course, but well, here you are. One of the successes of all of us is one you don't see, and that's that there's no liberalization through the European level of water services. And I think that's a great achievement of all of us. One of the issues we are confronted with as trade unions, and many of us, when we engage with discussions around privatization, be it of water, be it of buses, be it of prisons, be it of energy, is the argument of efficiency. The private sector can do it better than the public sector. And many of us have come across this when they engage with politicians or others. The private sector will deliver a cheaper service for us because it's inherently more efficient. So one of the things we have done together with PSIRU, Public Service International Research Unit, I think many of you know their work, is to see what is there about this argument that goes around. And they did a sort of, how do you call it in academic terms, a sort of meta-analysis for us, looking at many, many different studies. And consistently, all of these studies say that there is no difference between the efficiency of the public and private sector. I mean, there's no difference. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's public or private from a point of efficiency. And that's actually quite helpful because it includes studies of the World Health Organization when they look at health, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations Development Program. So you have to wonder, why is it then that there still is privatization? And then you have those who say, if it doesn't matter in terms of the efficiency, well, let's privatize it because it's better not to have rule of the state or the municipality. And of course, we who say, well, if there's no difference in terms of efficiency, well, let's keep it public because there's so many other advantages of having services in-house. The democratic argument is one of those. The possibilities for participation is another. Accountability, transparency, all of these arguments pile up on the side of the positive dimension of public services. And actually, when our unions engage in these struggles, and I think as a tactic it has proven its worth, when our unions engage in these struggles at local level, one of the things we try, the unions try to do, is to organize local referenda in which all of these arguments can be made in a more profound manner. And most of these referenda are won. Most of the local referenda are won, starting with this little one in Vilnius at a time. The Thessaloniki referendum, many people here will recall. Many of these referenda we can win because the public is convinced that public services need to be run in-house and that indeed the future of their services in municipalities is a public one. And I think that is something on which we can cooperate in a very broad movement as we are. I want to say a couple of things later on how we can link with some of the forthcoming discussions we have at European level, because we will get over the next weeks, the next 8 to 12 weeks, an avalanche of proposals. And I think it's good for us also to bring our issues into these discussions also at European level. But that's maybe for a second round.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for the invitation and for such an inspiring yesterday and hopefully today too. I mean, yesterday we looked a lot and heard a lot about the achievements and the examples and evidence of municipalisation working and remunicipalisation campaigns. So today, enjoying that evidence, but I want to focus today particularly on the challenges that we face, challenges of capacity, of alliance building, of reframing the narrative, and of bringing values and rights and focusing on the vulnerable, because I think that's a challenge that we can maybe not bring to the front enough. And I want to do that through the lens of the experience of the Irish local government reform campaign, More Power to You, which was led by public sector trade unions, Forces, SIP2 and Connect, who are here today. And basically, the campaign was about trying to accept the fact that we were starting from a very low base in Ireland, where local government is very, very poor. And it's very difficult, therefore, to engage citizens in imagining how you could get better services through local government or through municipalised or re-municipalised services. So to some degree, the campaign had to start with building the capacity of local government first, and then trying to encourage people to demand that their services be delivered through that local government. So it was trying to link the idea of better local democracy leading to better public services and better lives. And we focused in particularly to ground it on public housing, water, refuse collection and energy. We've done the campaign was led out through the local elections this year, where we campaigned for directly elected mayors, the restoration of sub-county government, increased revenue for local government and democratic forms of financial participation. And the pledge was signed by over 1,000 candidates and 11 out of the 12 political parties. And the campaign is now going across the local authorities. So to some degree, the campaign is very much about agenda setting. But there's also the challenge of trying to convince people about the most appropriate level for services to be delivered. And we talked about this yesterday quite a lot. The cultural and constitutional specifics of each country mean that there are different arguments in different countries about where and how to deliver those public services. And Ireland is a good example of a unitary state where local power is not legally embedded and is politically vulnerable. And we heard the example of Korea earlier on. So there's a tension in trying to balance local and central power. Similar to post-colonial India, post-colonial Ireland has highly centralised power, and it's an obstacle to municipalisation. It disables local policy and operational capacity. And that's quite serious then when you're trying to convince people that this is the best level at which to operationalise public services. Ireland has the weakest local government autonomy in the whole of Europe. Only 8% of our government expenditure goes out through the local, compared to 65%, for example, in Denmark. So a real campaign in scaling up is actually about pulling down the national expenditure so it goes out through the local municipality, and convincing people that that is more efficient. It gives local multipliers, it creates local jobs, it brings expenditure into different regions of the economy. So it's more distributive at the end of the day. And that's important in terms of the kind of argument that John was saying about proving those types of efficiencies. But I think one of the things about, we've heard a lot of evidence, and I think it's really good, TNI and PSI, PSU have brought together a lot of cost-benefit analysis, social return on investment analysis, local multiplier analysis that shows in concrete terms that investing through local municipalities does make economic sense. But I think we need to be careful to win the argument at another level of value as well. There's an argument in feminist circles that you shouldn't focus too much on the business case for gender equality because it's too instrumental. You should win the basic value about the right to gender equality first. And I think there is a danger in over-focusing on efficiency and value for money that we lose the rights and the value of public value, of solidarity, of sustainability, and those types of care and ethic of care. So I think there's a lot that can be brought in from a gendered and a feminist perspective to link production, social reproduction and care of our environment and create new types of alliances around that. I just want to finish by talking about participation, because there's been a lot of talk about how do you make participation real? How do you make it productive? How do you bring real active citizenship and community participation? And in Ireland, we actually have more positive examples at a national level of constitutional conventions, citizens' assemblies, and more tokenistic local participation examples. So we are quite challenged in trying to find ways to build institutions that support local participation. And one of the real issues here actually is privatisation. The degree to which privatisation is forcing the procurement on civil society. So a lot of our NGOs, our civil society organisations are being forced to act like mini markets, tendering for things, and that is in effect taking away their own solidarity with each other, stopping them collaborating with each other, and stopping them acting as vehicles of solidarity with local communities. And I think this is quite serious, because if we talk about public social partnerships or public civic partnerships, we're assuming there is social infrastructure and institutions there, but privatisation is also eating into them, and that's important, I think, in trying to break those cycles. So I just want to finish in terms of the idea of basic services. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, we're talking about the need to take a global perspective and to move away from Eurocentric, but I think there is a real idea of framing the narrative so that people can see and imagine the future that you were asking them to be involved in creating. There's that idea, if you can't see it, you can't be it. But if you can't imagine it, you can't campaign for it. So it's really, really important, I think, to try and find ways to find some global narratives that can popularise. And I think one of the most important ways there is the campaign for universal basic services, focused in a democratically controlled, locally delivered and targeted way, and grounded in human rights. I think the idea of universal basic services can be the uniting ground across a global demand for the local delivery of universal services, so that people who are most vulnerable will be guaranteed to access those services, and that services will be delivered in a way that their voice and their lived experience of what they need flows through the design and the implementation of those services. I do think that no matter where we are in the world, that can be a clarion call that actually does make sense for all of us and gives us all a narrative. So I'd like to affirm those campaigns for basic universal services, and just to encourage us to think more about how we can make them. And I want to end just by saying about, the idea of putting public in the title of the future was named yesterday by somebody, and I really welcome it. And I think Harvey's challenge about, finding ways to undermine capitalism and the accumulation of the mass, that there's multiple ways we can do that, rethinking the relationship between the state, the market and society. And public provision, active states and democratic societies have to be at the heart of that.
Thanks a lot, Mary. And for the next two speakers, what we wanted to do is to then look specifically at two examples in Norway and in Canada, and of situations where actually trade labor unions and workers having not only stopping the privatization, but also proposing new ways forward to think how could be a more inclusive and a more just public service, also with inclusion of the knowledge and the expertise and the tradition of the workers. So we will start with Juni. Do you want to speak here? Yeah, super. And she will speak about the experience in Norway.
Is this on?
Yeah.
It's on.
No?
Okay. I'm sorry, but I'm not Unni. It's not her fault. Unni got sick
we got confused
in the last minute, so I had to step in.
She's
So
ill.
I'm gonna try.
Oh, sorry.
So do my best. Yeah. No, it's not your fault. Thank you for the invitation and for a very important and interesting day yesterday. Before I start talking about our achievements and the example, I just have to say a few words about our union and our work. The Nordic model of the tripartite dialogue and cooperation has a long tradition and has been successful and is an important part of what we have been working on. Municipal tripartite cooperations refers to a constructive cooperation between politicians, administrative leaders, and trade unions. The aim is to work together and create a culture of cooperation that promotes finding the best local solutions. Fagforbundet is the largest union in Norway. We have 370,000 members and about 17,000 shop stewards across the country. So the reason we're here today is because we have had quite good results on remunicipalization. It's so much easier when you're not on the stage. And our result is, well, I first have to say, we have about 420 municipalities in Norway. And at this point, within the last couple of years, 117 municipalities has voted to remunicipalize or the waste services, which is quite amazing results. And I'm going to talk about how this was possible. What happened was that two of the largest waste collection companies went out of business. They went bankrupt, actually. And we used this as a possibility and as a stepping stone to take the waste collection back into public hands. What Fagforbundet did was to put together a professional team of 5 persons from our head office. Unni is one of them. I'm
Super.
not. And they actively went out and helped the trade unions in the municipalities which stood in these kind of difficulties and position to take it back. They organized a 24/7 help. Some of the local shop stewards were really targeted by journalists, aggressive politicians, owner organizations of the waste of the companies, and they needed quick support, and they needed it 24/7 for a period. The help that was provided mainly was to give them practical and theoretical help and also physical presence. What they did was to support them and building their competence and self-competence to be able to stand in the discussions with the politicians, the journalists, and company. They built a social campaign structure within the local union so that they can handle media and information and make a good strategy. And they also wrote articles for the local news press and gave them prepared juridical, financial and cost analysis, which they were not. Well, they needed help to get this, but that made them have a good argument so the politicians would trust them. Influencing the politicians was also a big part of that. And the local unions are the ones who kind of know which people on the which politicians are possible and necessary to influence to get a decision done. And this is kind of strategic works that it's good to be helped on by someone who's doing this on a daily basis. And well, what was the case was the municipalities had 2 options in this situation when the garbage was piling up. They could end the contract with the waste companies and find someone else to take over, or they could wait until the waste companies went bankrupt and take the waste management in-house instead. And they waited, and that was a good decisions. When they waited, the municipalities could buy all the vehicles and take over the personnel from these 2 waste companies instead of just terminated the contract and giving it away. And that's just one part of it. The next part is to actually make sure that what comes after is a good public service. So this project team actively worked on rebuilding a good service. So they found the members in the waste companies that were not necessarily our members, and figure out and kind of draw a map on how this could be done to make sure it was a good service and how to kind of make the most effective routes to get the waste collected, make it more efficient, and organize the teams in a way to make sure that no one lagged behind on their schedule. Because that's an important part of it. It's not just supposed to be public, it's also supposed to be quality services. And this gave proof for the politician and also helped on the public opinion. So it has kind of had a good effect on other services as well. As said, 117 municipalities had voted to remunicipalize, and the goal is to reach 137 in 2 or 3 years. So it's quite an ambitious plan, but I think it's possible. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, did you prefer to speak from there or? Stay here. Super. So I move on. So now Robert, who also does research, will speak about the case of Canada.
It's on. Hello, test. Yes, great. Thank you very much. A little about CUPE. CUPE is the Canadian Union of Public Employees. We're the largest union in Canada, representing 700,000 workers, the vast majority of whom are in the public sector, in a wide, diverse range of sectors, from transportation to education to healthcare. We exist in a milieu where the vast majority of public services remain public, but there are have been incursions into those services by the private sector and by governments who, after everyone knows that cycle of austerity that then leads to the justifications for privatization. And we've been paying attention to that for decades, literally decades, and educating our members about why it is. Had an interesting conversation with Mildred Warner yesterday about the difference between American trade unions, Canadian trade unions. We have been taking seriously for a long time the fact that that remunicipalization, that public services are not just important for the workers, but for civil society in general. And we've been making that case through our education materials for a long time. And I appreciated your point, Mary, about that, not just making a case about efficiency and the economy, the cost-benefit analysis, but the public good argument as well, and that's important. And I think that we've been trying to take that very seriously in our own internal and external education materials on these issues. I do want to thank. First of all, I want to recognize my friends David McDonald from Municipal Services Project and Drew Jay from Friends of Public Services, who organized the first Future is Public International Conference in Montreal in the summer of 2018, and thank them for providing some early momentum to these conversations, and also thank TNI for the important work that you've been doing for such a long time in bringing these stories together. It's really important, and I think that it's helped our work. And we'll continue to, and we appreciate the opportunity to contribute, but I think we also appreciate the opportunity to learn from everybody here. So it's really great. We, just to give a few examples of the work that CUPE has done on remunicipalization, it's hard for me to say too.
What?
This remunicipalization, so we need a better word. We produced a report with our frequent research partner in Vancouver, the Columbia Institute, a few years ago called Back in House, where we documented 15 cases of services that were brought back in-house by municipalities, and promoted this piece widely and used it both for our members, but also widely disseminated this report publicly to talk about the benefit of bringing these services back in-house, the cost benefit, but also the benefits, the improvements to quality of service and to civic life in general. That report was turned into a guide for municipalities to help them ask the right questions when considering privatization or when considering bringing services back in-house. And we've been using that guide mostly in Western Canada in meetings with municipalities and mobilization that we do with friendly city councillors in certain jurisdictions. For the current study, we were able to gather over 20 more cases of remunicipalization in Canada, and are contributing those to the T&I report. We know that there are more, and we hope to be able to continue our work in gathering them and using them as examples. We're also we're currently producing a contracting and toolkit for our members that we'll use to train our locals to launch campaigns to bring services back in-house in municipalities where they've been privatized, and we're also developing a pensions toolkit to talk about some of the campaigning and work that we can do to encourage our pension investment decisions to be more responsible. We're at a really contradictory moment in Canada right now, which is sort of the point I wanted to close with. We're at a point where industry seems to actually be a bit down on P3s and privatization at the moment. I was at an event a couple weeks ago in Toronto, an annual event where P3 advocates and proponents and the KPMGs and Ernst Youngs gather to congratulate themselves and talk about new avenues for privatization and profit. And at this event, the North American director of SNC-Lavalin's infrastructure arm announced that they were no longer going to be bidding on turnkey projects, which is, I think, an indication of some lack of confidence in the P3 market in Canada at the moment. And we heard another VP of a European firm describe Canada as a P3 graveyard. So that's very interesting to hear from the industry side. At the same time, we have recently seen a number of pseudo-populist governments, right-wing governments, elected to provincial leadership in Canada that are pushing P3s aggressively, and not for any pragmatic reasons at all, but it is transparently ideological. The government of Ontario, led by Doug Ford, has been canceling green projects, canceling green energy projects for hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of losses to the province, while at the same time announcing $144 billion of infrastructure spending that will go solely through P3s, hospitals, schools, and transit. We have a Alberta government led by Jason Kenney that is cutting 6,000 jobs from the public service, that is putting limitations on municipalities' ability to make independent decisions, criticizing Calgary for a recent sales tax increase that Calgary passed to cover the cut to emergency services that the province had made to the city of Calgary's budget. And recently, Jason Kenney's government ordered the 19 public school boards in Alberta to remove the word public from their names. Purely ideological aggression against the public sector. But this represents, I think, an opportunity. The public are not blind to these advances, to this aggression. And we're seeing, I think, a really interesting moment of public solidarity around resistance to these types of cuts and this type of austerity when the Canadian economy is doing fine, and it's absolutely not necessary. It is purely ideologically driven. We have been able to join with and have some success with a campaign in Ontario called Stop the Cuts that has pushed back a lot of Doug Ford's cuts. In fact, just yesterday, the Eastern Ontario teachers at all the public schools staged a one-day strike, and you could see not just the teachers on the picket line, but parents on the picket line in solidarity with them. That was just yesterday. All the schools were closed. So I think this provides a real opportunity for us right now, and it's an opportunity to advance our critiques, but also to build public solidarity in the pushback against privatization, and also in articulating a pro-public future, which is more and more something that we're turning our attention to. And again, I appreciate this opportunity to share some of this with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Robert. We would like to close this round panel with Satoko that will present the report, summary of the findings of the last report from TNI.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Satoko Kishimoto from Transnational Institute. I think many of you have got this report. We worked together as a working draft for this conference. So we wanted to provide the resource which to contribute to generate the good discussions in this conference, of course, and after. Well, I just briefly. This is not just happened from yesterday to today. Indeed, it's a very long journey of collaboration of many groups who are here as well, but also not here. The trade unions and the community organizations, NGOs, we are fighting, privatization. Then realize something, we have to offer something that's something working. So remunicipalization has kind of got our attention. So originally, the Public Service International Research Unit came to there's some good numbers, but it seems there are more cases in the world. Let's explore. So this is really how we began, like 6 years ago. So number be growing like 180 to 235. That's only water. So our work is really originated water struggle and human rights. So then realizing, let's see other sectors, what is happening in energy, what is happening in education, waste services, and healthcare, social care, which everything is so important for all of us. So that's that we took challenge to expand, even though our capacity is very, very small. This is only possible by working together. Literally all cases came from really, the information who local groups are contributed to us. So that's this is the nature of this global study. So for this small presentation, I would like to focus on what is new. So I think you are mostly interested in what is new from the 2017 the research. Well, first we needed to really be clear about what we are talking about. We are really at the big ocean of flow of still privatization, public finance initiative, public-private partnership, whatever the different names we are swimming in the big ocean. So then also the remunicipalization it has been always unpopular word, but it's getting the people start accepting. So, but we wanted to differentiate more clearly than last time, remunicipalization and municipalization. So remunicipalization is public, the ownership change from private to public. So that's we all know about. But also there are a lot of the initiatives and cases really creating new public services to provide affordable services to community and people. So that it didn't exist or it never be public. So this we call the municipalization or creating public services. So what, like for instance, the U.S. The telecommunication, it is something new. We included telecommunication sector. This is something we didn't in last research because we have realized there are many initiatives of municipal broadband, municipal broadband happening in the U.S. So how is that's being written by the Democracy Collaborative and the Municipal Broadband Initiative. So there is a background paper. So basically, the many places in especially rural. And really, are you sure? Oh my. Well, my colleague said me, and actually I have more 5 minutes. Don't upset me, please. Well, okay. So yeah, that's something in the private sector is reluctant to invest anyway. So this is the rural communities, small towns. The broadband investment is not affordable. The profitable enough. Those places, municipalities are making investment to make accessibility to for everybody. But also there are a lot of initiative of community providing internet services. So we see a lot of collaboration of local authority and local authority and the community internet services working together. Investment is done by the local authority. Then last piece of services provided by community-based non-profit cooperatives. So saying so, we put this in heart mark, connecting, the municipalization. We are talking a lot about the public capacity, public cooperation, collaboration based on solidarity. So this we are calling public-public partnerships long time, but this has taken very different diverse forms of partnerships, non-profit, solidarity basis, culturally they help respectable. So we also call public community partnerships, which can include more users and communities. So we are also inspired a new concept of public commons partnerships. So we're going to hear those all different diverse partnerships in the afternoon, one of the sessions. So public commons partnerships, what I understand is can refer not only just making partnerships, but also kind of common the ownership of public authority and the community. So that's also something new, excited us. So especially this new the updated study, we really wanted to see what are positive impact and changes after remunicipalization. Many cases, it's too much too early to say, to analyze, but nevertheless, we could found a lot of the indicators of the different cases. So the cost saving, well, the previous speaker mentioned, this is not the most important things. However, it is important to make an argument, especially people are not convinced. That's why we intentionally put this argument, the front line. The 245 cases, at least, have a clear evidence the after remunicipalization cost is saved for public sector. So the working conditions is also very important. The factor you can see the number how clear difference of the working condition for is improved. But central things that this is the Mary mentioned as values, universal access to protect social and human rights. This is the center of the public services. That's also we have the clear number of public commitment clearly publicly mentioned in the after the ownership change. Something also very challenging and new we wanted to take the challenge is the climate crisis. So climate crisis, the last time the study is we are not able to analyze or link of the climate crisis of this remunicipalization trend. So this time we really intentionally pay attention how public ownership can help to create future generations public services. And then last one, the biggest number is 297. This is community wealth building. This idea, we are very inspired by the Democracy Collaborative and other many organizations working on that. So this is about the positive impact in a community, like job creations, also the public investment and energy and clean energy and clean environment. So we have found clear reference of those number of 297. The after remunicipalization, one of them, one of the elements is improved. All this the cost and universal access, more democratic control, climate resilience, community wealth building, and many other 13 indicators. We believe this is a very important ingredients of 21st century public ownership. This is the last point, the bit future looking. We plan to make this all cases as a public database, publicly accessible database. Not yet, so I thank to the collaboration with the University Glasgow. After this conference, we're going to work on the making this all cases available to public to access information as the public municipalization, let's say deprivatization, the global database. Thank you.
So thank you very much for us, because I have actually skipped family names because I'm aware that I will be mispronouncing everything. But thank you again, Satoko Kishimoto from TNI that presented this overview of what happens with all these cases of remunicipalization. Then we actually heard from Robert Ramside from Canadian Union of Public Employees. What is the situation with this P3, which is, for those of us which are not so used to actually English acronyms, is public-private partnerships, and how this is, like not only, let's say, a question of how good is doing for the business and the private business, but actually how it's an ideological fight, and that was to dismiss the public, from the public imagination. Then Mary Murphy, who made some very interesting points about this shift and the balance between taking into account the business part, but also the rights. And Jean-Bill and Gaudrian, who also made this very clear case for the efficiency and how this public should be somehow it has this background. And a special thanks to Ingrid, who said that had to jump in the last minute to explain this super interesting example. And I will start with this Norway sample, because we were also thinking how this tripartite combination and tradition of working, but also how this allowed the unions to work on different scales and allowed this national organization of the union to support and to work with local shop stewards and on making this transformation into the public. What we can see on these examples, I think, is that there are some common threads I could identify, where the question of knowledge, how you build knowledge and how this knowledge is transferred, the question of access that has to do with equality, but also to who is accessing these services and how. And I think that Robert didn't mention, but in his report is mentioned this influence of the national scale and how the big national projects, like, for example, the Infrastructure Investment Bank or the social bonds, actually have an impact. But my question now, it will be more like how, beyond this discussion between it should be all the state, it should be local scale, I like the word remunicipalization, because to me it links with municipalism, and this is where I'm working for, and I think it has special characteristics. And one of these special characteristics is the capacity of working with the social movements and the civic society in the ground, which are the people that are going to be directly affected. So my question for the table and later for the floor will be, how do you envision the possible articulations and coalitions, or the working together of this, let's say, this new tripartite, which is like the policymakers with, of course, the civil society that englobes the unions, and with the production of a very specific kind of knowledge on pushing forward certain kind of struggles around the challenges that, as some of you also mentioned, the bankruptcy of a private company, or even the crisis of this 3P constellations, are an opportunity to propose something that is not only the re-statalization of the public, but the ambition of I like this contrast between, you know, the public think that the public is good, and then you go, wait, what is the public? I mean, the people is the public, and the services are also the public. What are we talking when we're talking about the public? And that Setoko mentioned how we can imagine that apart from public-public partnerships and public social partnerships, we have public common partnerships, which means at the end a transformation of the way we understand collective resources and systems of mutuality that make that everybody is able to access basic things that we need to live, because we need the water to live, and we need the energy to live, and we need the housing to live. And this has to do with reproduction, as Mary put on the table, and our capacity of just living here in this world, you know, in the next few years, and how this, rearticulation of the public and the work that has been doing from your territories and from your knowledge can help to this. So, small question. You can just pick it in pieces. We can just divide it. Like, I don't know, Ingrid, do you want to start? Or how was this articulation? What did you see this thing and the possibility to actually reach beyond the unions and the officials and the public into the another actors?
Well, I don't think I can answer all of that. but what I would like to say about the tripartite dialogue is that in Norway it is institutionalized. So we have it on a national level. The confederation, our confederation meets with the employers and the government, and we have this on all levels. And I think what has been important to make it work is to establish trust between the parts of the dialogue. And I think that is what you need if you're gonna take this cooperation to other parts of the society as well. You need to trust each other and work on that part. And then I think you sometimes have to give and take, and you also have to be trustworthy and in your arguments and in how you treat each other. And that's not an easy fix, but I think it's going to be a start. And for the unions that we are working with, it's about being strategic and kind of finding the good arguments. And you have to have arguments and cases that they're going to stand. And when they feed the local newspapers with information, it has to be good and it has to be trustworthy. And that's the same when they're talking to, if they're trying to get help from other organizations or from the politicians or the administration. I think it's the same, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll stop with that.
John Vinnan was mentioning before, no? That there is in the next weeks certain...
Yes. I think the cases and the work TNI, PSI, others have done to collect all these examples, that's quite important, because it does show that we not only have a political case, as you underlined, but our case economically is also solid. We can win that argument. We can be convincing. The representative of Paris is not here. Otherwise, the person would have said that the remunicipalization of water in Paris actually had led to cost savings, lower tariffs, leading to more investment in water services. So these cases are important to underline our arguments. One of the things, as I said, which will be important, I think, for all of us, if we like it or not, if we want to engage with it or not, over the coming weeks, and that starts next week, is that this new European Commission is going to come with a whole series of proposals. Next week we can expect the proposals for the Green New Deal. The week thereafter, I looked it up, the week thereafter we have proposals for what they now call an annual sustainability growth survey. So they have added the sustainable to it. We will get something on the future of Europe. There will be in January there will be the publication of the Just Transition Sustainable Investment Mechanism. There will be the roadmap on social Europe. There will be another sustainable growth discussion, about the stability pact. So, and it goes on until March with all these initiatives. And I think all of these initiatives allow us to have an input around our arguments, the reasons why there need to be public services, the reasons why there needs to be municipal and regional initiatives, and that needs to be recognized in all these different initiatives. The risk is that they will try to do business as usual, and that will mean extension of things like the Juncker investment plan, and the Juncker investment plan, which actually does try to promote public-private partnerships by guaranteeing the private sector return on its investment, or at least guarantees on the money they put in, which is, by the way, another piece of evidence similar as what Robert mentioned for Canada. I mean, if you have such good projects as the private sector, why do you need public money to guarantee your investment? So there is a problem with many of these projects. And I think for all of us, it is important to engage with these discussions, which will now happen over the next weeks and the forthcoming months. Certainly also we as trade unions will engage. I think the challenge for us is how do we bring the many examples we have of how we do work at local level, the good proposals and the good examples we have at local level, how do we bring that to European level? And I think that is certainly strategically also something worthwhile to continue reflecting upon. We have the arguments. We say often you need not only the force of your argument. We also have to build the argument of force at European level, and to put ourselves on the agenda with our proposals. I think that will be important the coming months.
Yeah, just thinking about how you build the alliances with different types of publics, be it citizens or users of services, workers, civil society. I think one of the interesting lessons from Ireland, where we've had some very powerful momentum of change in relation to referendums on marriage equality and on abortion in the recent years, was that we had to very carefully construct a language that people could see themselves in. And that people could identify with. So, and it had to be an offensive language about what people were for, rather than what they were against. And I think one of the really encouraging things and inspiring things here is it allows you to find a way of not only saying that you're against privatisation, but that you're for a different vision of how you could organise society. And it gives a language to that. I think that's really important. But I think it's really important as well for unions and for public representatives or whoever is trying to build these campaigns to ask people and to listen to members about the kind of things that they want in their lives. And David Harvey said this yesterday at the very end of his speech. People want time. People want caring relationships. People want sustainable communities to live in. And the language of the campaign has to reflect what people say that they want at the end of the day. And I think that that's the lessons I would have learned from being part of the mobilisations for marriage equality and abortion in Ireland, was that we really had to talk to people. We really had to reflect back to people what we heard them say. And then they went with us in the campaigns when they heard that they were being listened to and that their language was being reflected in the campaign. So I think that kind of painful, time-taking alliance building from the ground up, listening to people and reflecting their language, has to be part of it.
Well, I am quite convinced TNI organization like TNI should play a role in terms of alliance building in this the kind of work. We need to have a common narrative, common story. We can confidently tell our community and our politicians, our media. So for the 1,408 successful remunicipalization, deprivatization cases, 58 countries, which involved 2,400 cities. So that's something strong, powerful numbers. However, numbers are not only important. Numbers actually, after all, not the most important thing. This is something give us tool to communicate. But most important thing is those numbers are backed by really serious research, study, mobilization, work, and the struggles for different countries and the different places. So they actually I think I got my email the few days before as a conference material. We have published 15 working papers, which are really telling inside stories of those different country, different sectors. What is the process? What is the achievement? What is the challenge and the lessons? So that's something we want to keep working on with you. So this the common story is important. We keep messaging, but also keep working together to provide analysis, provide evidence by the different, the concrete the examples. So that's the Paris, today we don't hear, we cannot have Paris, Eau de Paris, the Benjamin Gastin, but we have a paper from him. So Teresa, we talked about the new public governance, co-production of public services. We heard, some people heard the Eduna's story yesterday. There is a paper. So we please, and the printed paper is almost gone, but everything is on the website at the front page of conference site. So I hope those resources will contribute to keep building alliance and to contribute to your discussion locally in your community and your country. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't really know how to answer that question. So maybe I'll pick up on a few themes that we've heard here, and instead of thinking of a re-articulation of the public, maybe in our context, I would suggest a realignment of the public and making sure we don't lose these opportunities to establish solidarity with the public, both with our membership and with residents of municipalities and users of public services. As I mentioned in my presentation, we in Canada have this very interesting moment right now where not only where the ideological push by certain governments to establish privatization regimes is not only affecting the day-to-day lives of parents with autistic children, for example, whose services and access to support services are being slashed, but also industry as well is souring a bit on the Canadian model of public-private partnerships, and looking to other examples such as the alliance model in the UK. So we've got this interesting moment where we can take advantage of these opportunities to build solidarity with different constituencies in the public that we don't often have access to. We don't often have obvious solidarity with, and we can really build that. Mary, you said something. Yes, and I think language is very important. I think how we communicate is very important. It's critical, and I think we on the left often are not as good at this as the right is. Jason Kenney, the sort of pseudo-populist conservative premier of Alberta, his campaign slogan was economy, jobs, pipelines. That was it. And that resonated with Albertans. And the left had nothing to come back with that was so easy to understand, right? The environment and the public good and the common good, it's all important, but we didn't have those just 3 bullet points that summed it up so completely. And in Ontario, the Doug Ford government, another pseudo-populist conservative government, has changed all the automobile license plates to have a new motto. It says "Open for business." What are we going to say? Closed for business? So I think we need to be better at communicating. I think we need to be better at speaking the language of the people that we want to be in solidarity with.
But so going back, for example, for the example that Satoko was mentioning in Terrassa, they had this slogan that said, "You read, you write water, but we read democracy." So I think that maybe that's what my proposal is, that maybe going out of specifically discourse that is built by the political left, but it's grounded on people's lives and on people's needs and on other kind of imaginary of actually how we can live together. Maybe there is also like new aspects of how we can work even to the European level and build alliances that are beyond, like the, let's say, the usual actors that, as was mentioned also yesterday during the presentation of the award, like sometimes they are not really seated on the table. But these could be discussed in the open floor sessions that are going to be next, and that actually will then try to articulate this last panel with the previous discussions on public democratic ownership and also on new municipalism. But now we have maybe 10 minutes left, more? Yeah, okay, 13 minutes left, because we were very good. So we are going to open questions from the floor, comments. We have 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take them all together. So if you want to speak, just this is your chance.
Thanks very much. Adrian Kane, SIP2 Ireland. I thought one of the most interesting debates was yesterday afternoon, and there was a kind of divide between the global south and Europe in terms of the remunicipalization, I suppose, as a strategy. And I think from the perspective of a kind of post-colonial point of view, there's so little capacity at local level. I think it's there's a question mark as to whether that is the correct strategy to pursue to bring things back into public ownership. I happen to believe that it is, and I think it's a good universal approach. But there's almost two steps in terms of that kind of centralized state that is typical in a post-colonial establishment. It's about building democratic power in the first place at local level, then to achieve a situation whereby you can start bringing in services that had been privatized. If you look at this as a concept, or why are we discussing this on the left, it strikes me that probably why we've started to discuss this is because we've lost influence at state level in terms of parties of the left not being in power. So we've arrived at a kind of Leninist perspective of all power to the Soviets by maybe a very different route, it strikes me. And I actually think it is the right strategy. And if you look in Ireland, we're a long way behind in terms of an awful lot of services that have been privatized. But one thing that we found is that through the trade union movement, we had this huge fragmentation on the left. We're beginning to bring parties together within a broader trade union umbrella by pushing this strategy. So I do think at the end of the day, it is probably something that we can all buy into. We may be starting at it from very different perspectives, but it still strikes me as a universal project that has emerged throughout the world.
Thank you. I think there was someone else over there, or otherwise there were like 2 people there, for sure. So we have 5 minutes left, 1, 2, and 3.
You said 5 minutes?
No, 5 minutes to share. Let's say 5 minutes in common. So
Okay.
you can use 1 minute
I'll
each,
try
and
to
then we
be
have
brief.
to wrap up.
My name is Per Jensen. I'm from Denmark, from one of the unions in Denmark. And I have a point of the debate winning the public opinion. I don't think that remunicipalization in Danish, at least, is not a very good word for winning the public opinion. And we have campaigned in FOA not for remunicipalization of social services, but for saying no to profits on welfare. That's much more easier to sell to the public, and I think that's one at least example of how to actually do something to win the public opinion, which we have succeeded in that respect. Thank you.
Thanks. There, and then there.
Thank you. Thomas Morrow, and just a quick question, mostly to Ingrid, but it would be to everyone. In the case of remunicipalization in Norway, were the public banks involved, the communal bank in Norway, or, for example, the Nordic Investment Bank, in any sense of rebuying it? Whether public banks were involved in the remunicipalization process of refinancing or financing it?
And the last one there.
Buenos días. Siento no poder hablar en inglés, así que espero a ver si puedes hacer de traductora.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. I hope the unions will forgive me for taking this very unprofessional thing from the
Bien,
from the
gracias.
professionals.
Gracias. Yo vengo de la plataforma por la remunicipalización de los servicios públicos en Madrid.
Your name?
Pedro Casas.
Pedro Casas comes from the platform for the remunicipalizations of public services in Madrid.
Quería solamente señalar una idea que no está demasiado explícita bajo mi punto de vista en los debates que estamos teniendo sobre el tema de la municipalización o remunicipalización de los servicios públicos.
So he wants to stress one idea that he thinks it has come through clearly in all these debates.
Y es que creo que no solamente es un debate de ideas, de convencernos, sino que fundamentalmente es un debate de poder que tienen las grandes empresas que se lucran con la gestión privatizada de los servicios públicos y que condicionan todo el debate y, en definitiva, los resultados.
So it's not only a question of creating like a new narrative for a language, it's also a question of power, and the power that the big companies that are actually extracting the profits from these privatized services and the capacity that they have to influence the debate in itself.
Que en definitiva influyen en primer lugar sobre los políticos, no solamente los de derechas, sino también los de izquierdas.
So they have an influence on politicians, not only on right-wing politicians, but also on left-wing politicians.
Que cuando un político de izquierdas quiere hacer un trabajo de remunicipalizar servicios públicos, se enfrenta a la opinión pública de los medios de comunicación dominados por las grandes corporaciones que les pueden hacer campaña para perder las próximas elecciones.
So when they want to remunicipalize, when a left-wing politicians want to remunicipalize services, they also have to confront media campaigns that will play against them in the next elections.
En Madrid, por ejemplo, los servicios públicos están en manos de empresas constructoras y de fondos de inversión.
So, for example, in Madrid, most of privatized public services are in the hands of construction, real estate and building companies and of hedge funds.
Y finalmente, cuando alguno de estos políticos que tiene voluntad por remunicipalizar luego se encuentra con los tribunales, por ejemplo, en el caso de Barcelona, los tribunales han tumbado una ley de referéndum de Barcelona para poder hacer consultas públicas en su propio municipio para ver cómo querían organizar. Eso los tribunales lo han impedido.
And then even if then you go through, then politicians are facing actually legal court cases. In the case of Barcelona, for example, and even on the level of your capacity of making referendums to ask about the remunicipalization.
Y en definitiva, y finalmente, la propia legislación impide, en muchos casos, facilita la privatización de los servicios, pero impide la remunicipalización de los servicios.
And then lastly, national legislation, but also regional legislation, they are in favor of privatization, but also they have certain specific clauses that are preventing the remunicipalization and the in-house services. So thank you. So, okay. I did. Do we still have some time? Well, one last minute. So the proposal is to actually, if you want specific comments, I think panelists are going to be around for the rest of the day, so you can get them from them. We are going to give 1 more minute to the floor if anybody wants to say something. Last comment? No? Okay. So we finish here. As I said, there is open workshops. And in the next section. And thank you, all of our panelists. Thank you very much. And thank you, guys, for being here today.